Hi, everyone. Welcome to our WASL Community Check-in call today, where we are really looking forward to hearing about the new brief we've just published from Sanam Naragi Anderlini, our CEO and founder, Recognizing Women Peacebuilders. And I will leave it until later for her to present that. Briefly, I just want to say welcome to this call, which we've been doing since the beginning of the pandemic to check in. The Women's Alliance for Security Leadership, WASL, which means to connect in Arabic, Urdu, and Persian, brings together existing women's networks, organizations, and practitioners, which you can see around the virtual table here on your screen, to exchange good practices, to collectively analyze current conflicts and trends, to generate solutions for the policy community, and to stand in solidarity with one another, which has been more important than ever in this last year. WASL members are locally rooted and transnationally linked women-led organizations with the authenticity and credibility to not only prevent violence and extremism, but also to crucially provide positive alternative vision and solutions for their societies by promoting peace, rights, and pluralism. We are Women Peacebuilders. So since the pandemic, we've been doing this call hosted by ICAN, which coordinates the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership. And we are really thrilled to be opening the space to you all, to the public for the first time for this launch. It has been a true silver lining to all of this last 8-9 months. And we are very thrilled to share the findings of our most recent brief with you today. So with that, just a couple of technical notes. We are streaming live on Facebook, not YouTube. Unfortunately, we had some technical glitches. The recording will be available afterwards. And we will be taking some questions and answers for a question and answer section at the end with the Women Peacebuilders and members of WASL and the presenters today. So if you have questions that you would like to pose, please feel free to enter them in the chat or to respond to our team who is live tweeting on Twitter, and we will do our best to respond to those in the moment or after the fact. With that, I will hand over to Sanam Naragi Anderlini, ICAN CEO and founder.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Melinda. It's, as always, it's great to see everyone that are my partners and members of the WASL community. Today it's, October is we're celebrating the 20th anniversary of Resolution 1325, and it's really my pleasure to share it with all of you, but also to be publishing this paper this month and kind of hopefully helping us get to the next level of the implementation of the spirit and the word of Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. 20 years ago, when we started looking at the question of women in war and what women's experiences were, and specifically what women did, it was Women Peacebuilders at the time who were kind of part of a global campaign from the grassroots in countries affected by war that kind of we pushed together to get to the Security Council. But peace building as a vocation was really quite new. And the label of peace builder really didn't exist. We were practitioners, human rights defenders, just different kind of activists, if you want. But peace, it wasn't really a term or a concept, or as I say, a vocation that was familiar to anyone. And I have to say that in the last 25 years, I always have an existential crisis, because every time I have to fill out a form at the airport that says, what is your profession? I'm like, what am I? What do I do? I'm not this, I'm not that. But over the last few years, and certainly in my research and over the years of being together as WASL, what's become clear is that we may all do slightly different things, but there are some core values, there's certainly some core approaches and strategies and tactics that we all use in our work. And it is related to, but also distinct from, more recognized practices and vocations. So are we human rights defenders? Yes, we are. But is that, are we limited, or do we work within the frameworks and the tactics and strategies that human rights defenders do? Not quite, because peace builders also reach out and talk to perpetrators of violence, and they're trying to find common ground. Are we mediators? Well, yes, we are. But mediation as a concept and as a kind of practitioner means that you take a slightly neutral, impartial stance, and you recognize that there are parties to a conflict and you're there to help them sort the problems out. But peace builders and everybody who's with me here in this meeting, they don't just take a neutral stance. They actually engage as actors to try and address the problems of the conflict. There is a vision and there are certain goals and approaches around what we want to achieve for our societies. It's not just recognizing that you have a government and an armed group that have to fight and you need to be the only legitimate actors. So peace builders themselves are part of the set of actors, and they have a political vision and an agenda, but it's different and distinct from the warring parties. So these are some of the elements that I've tried to identify in the paper, and then I'll put up a slide, a few slides to sort of walk us through this. But I also wanted to recognize that over the last 20 years, as we came up from the grassroots to say we need a common vocabulary at a global level in the global policy arena, and it became Women, Peace and Security, it's at the global level, we talk the language of international law and policies and norms. That's where we that's the space we're in. But peace building by definition, and everybody who works in this space is I see Esther in Cameroon and Mona in Yemen and Mariam Shakira in the Maldives. Everybody that I've known over the years working in their own context draws on culture, draws on tradition, draws on faith, draws on a lot of indigenous sort of social structures that are often invisible to the eyes of the international actors, especially international sort of diplomats and others. And given that our wars are civil wars, or there is definitely a local global dimension to it, we have to understand these things. And so one of the things that I've tried to do in the paper is to say, this is how peace builders operate. And we need to recognize that there is power and agency that they draw from their own indigenous cultures. And in doing that, I'm also challenging a lot of the neocolonial attitudes towards women in war zones or in developing settings and in other parts of the world, right? Instead of just saying, oh, when in Islamic context women don't have any rights, I'm actually looking at it and saying that's not true. We know what rights we have, and look at how women harness these rights. So it's a combination of different ways that I've tried to sort of articulate who, where, and what peace builders are. I'm going to try and share my screen with you now. From the start, and you would think I'd know how to do this by now. Hold on. So first I share my screen, and then I put the. Okay, so share screen. Oh, Melinda, will you let me share the screen? It doesn't let me. It's not allowing me to share it. Okay, share this. Okay. Can you see my screen now? No? Okay, there we go. You can see it now?
No.
No?
Ah, yes.
Okay. Hold on. You're screen sharing now. Can you see it now?
It's starting.
Okay, thank you. Okay. Yes? Okay, good, thank you. All right, so number one, given that peace builders, women peace builders have been so present in the advocacy around the agenda of peace and mediation, it's amazing how, as I say, as a cohort of actors, they've been largely overlooked, excluded. And in my view, I think part of the reason why there's been a struggle to get women peace builders or women to the peace table is that we haven't recognized that there are women who are doing peace building work. It's not generically any women, all women at any given time, but there are actually peace builders, and we need to recognize them. We're operating in a space where there are lots of conceptual shifts in thinking that we have to do. So number one, for example, is when we talk to peace builders on the ground and communities on the ground, and you say, what's the purpose of peace talks? Whether it's Afghanistan, Yemen, etc., there is a vision of peace for the society, and it's a holistic peace. People are thinking about economic and social issues and education for their children and the future and so forth. But what we see at the track one levels and those high level events that take place is that essentially there's a lot of, it's framed around power sharing. So, either we have to call these peace talks, or we have to talk about them in terms of power talks. But one of the things that I found over the years that I've been in the space is that if you're going to have political elite and military personnel and militias sitting around discussing the future of a country, and taking a lion's share of the power and the resources and whatever that comes with being the minister of this and taking charge of the government, we as the international level should also be talking about their role in responsibility sharing. And that shift of thinking about the peace process being a place where people who are going to be in charge are responsible for the well-being of their societies. So opening it up and thinking about peace again in this holistic way. It's related to the fact that, again, when you talk to women peace builders, so often there's an understanding that we have to address the grievances of the past. You can't go forward without understanding what injustices were done and what kind of violence and how people were affected. At the same time, you can't get stuck there. And you have to be thinking about what's the future you want to create. And I think this is, again, something that over the years, and I'd love to hear from our partners, but so often when you talk to women who are on the ground active in these spaces, they're looking at it from the standpoint of, our kids haven't been going to school and they need to go to school. And if you think about it in a very simple way, that a child who misses 1 year of education, how far they fall behind, what does it mean in terms of the future building of that society? So that question of where we've been and how we address the past, but actually the peace process being a moment where we also look forward and an aspirational way of what kind of society do we want to have and how do we live together instead of having a zero sum. Now, the research, as we all know, and there's plenty of references in the paper around the fact that when we have women's involvement, and especially when we have women's movements and civil society and engagement actively in peace processes, in these track one processes, the process, the outcomes, and the implementation is better, basically. The chances of success improve radically. The reasons for this are that women bring an authenticity of issues to the table. They bring the voices of communities to the table, and they hold actors accountable. You can't have, if women are there and you have a political party, the Taliban, that says, oh yes, we want to protect women, Afghan women will say, well, your definition of protection, which is to put us in the corner of the room and cover us in a burqa, is very different to our definition of protection, which is to be able to walk freely in the streets and send our children to school. And then another aspect of this is that the political reality, again, of the way that peace processes or peace talks, track one peace talks right now are designed, is that we do need the violent actors. And in the last 20 years, the recognition that you have to bring in non-state armed actors to the peace table has become standard practice. Back in the 1990s, it was very hard for governments to recognize non-state actors. They didn't want to talk to them. They didn't want to talk to, even before the transition in South Africa, Nelson Mandela was even referred to as a terrorist, in the 80s. So there's been a shift in terms of, this is the reality, we're dealing with non-state armed actors. But what we're saying is that their non-state armed actors are not the only actors. There are also non-state unarmed actors because of the nature of the wars. And if we keep designing our peace processes by rewarding violence, by only recognizing violent actors, all we do is enable violence and encourage violence. And again, so that has to shift, and we have to think, who are the broad scope of actors that are engaged in a conflict setting, in a conflict zone, and look at the peace actors as well as the war actors. And then another aspect of this, which is, which again, conceptually is kind of interesting, is that there's a tendency at the higher level and a tendency with our slightly older UN senior officials or ex-senior officials to think of peace processes in a very linear, old-fashioned 20th century way that, first we need to talk about the ceasefire and then everything else comes sequentially after that. And to talk about a ceasefire, you need the actors that have been violent. But again, what we know is that nobody comes to the table to talk only about ceasefires without talking about the other aspects, without talking about politics and economics and so forth. So it's not sequential. These things have to be simultaneous. And again, you need the other voices and representation at the table to think about those other issues. And more importantly, or as importantly, we need the local actors who have been engaged in local ceasefires to also be present. Because a lot of the times when we think about ceasefires in contemporary conflicts, it's not big armies that draw a line in the sand and one goes to one side and the other goes to the other side. It's actually in communities and it's in people's towns and villages and so forth. And it is very often women who are doing that mediation and creating those spaces or creating the lines and the sort of zones of peace that are necessary. So again, as actors in negotiating ceasefires, they should also be recognized and be at the formal process. So this is the sort of conceptual context. Now, what's been our problem? In the resolutions and in a lot of the language and in the wider community that we're involved in, so the broader global women's rights community, women human rights defenders, now we have the regional and global women's mediator networks. The labels of just saying women, for example, women should be at the table. Well, when we say women should be at the table, as one colleague, one UN official said, well, the delegates can bring bunches of flowers, so it can be. I've been in peace processes where literally the politicians have been told, oh, you have to have women in the delegation, and they brought their daughters and their cousins and their sisters. So they may be great women, but they're not relevant to the nature of what's going on, and they certainly are not the ones that have the experience that women who've been on the ground as peace builders do. So there's a question of bringing just women, generically women is a problem. The other side of the story is that a lot of the times when you say just bring women, you have political actors and they bring very hardline women. So it's, again, they have a right to be there. This isn't about whether they have a right or not. The question is, from our standpoint and from the WPS standpoint, whether those women are necessarily representative of the peace work that's going on, and whether, even if they want to, what are the limitations they have because they're part of a political delegation that is taking a political position. So how much of it is about their connection to the grassroots and representing the voice of women peace builders and the needs of their communities, versus how much of it is that they have to represent and push forth the perspectives of their political parties. So there are limitations around asking women to be in the delegations. Similarly, as I said before, to just say we want women mediators takes away the political agency that women have. So yes, we want women mediators. It was very useful when I was a member of the envoys team for Somalia to be there and to keep an eye on these issues and to ask the questions and enable the process. But it's not enough. You need. I'm not a Somali woman peace builder who's put my life on the line. I'm not a Yemeni peace builder who's put my life on the line. So it's really important that those voices are there. Related to this is that in the cases of Syria and Yemen, for example, there's a tendency from the design of the peace process to say, oh, we're going to have two parties. So there's a government, Syrian government, and then on this other side there's this coalition, and they sort of throw every element of opposition forces and whatever into this other force. The tendency to try and say to women, you have to also be part of this, is actually very dangerous for two reasons. One is that the issues that women bring forth suddenly become politicized. And this was a conversation that yesterday I was having with Rasha Jarham, who was saying, in Yemen, you have the Association of the Mothers of the Abductees, and we have a colleague here from that association. Their work has been to agitate for the release of detainees. Is it political? Is it sensitive? Of course it is, because people have been detained. But are they, as the mothers of the abductees, are they siding with one or other side of the government of the conflict party? No, they're on their own. They're independent. They have an independent agenda. And if we lump them or people like them into the political side, every issue they bring forward becomes politicized. So the issue of child soldiers suddenly becomes a political football as opposed to a humanitarian issue and a focus on the human being. So it's really important that we, again, recognize that they're coming with an agenda that is of the people and of the communities and not necessarily affiliated with the political dynamics of the belligerent parties. Another aspect of this is that a lot of the work that women peacebuilders do, and the reason why they're able to do it, is because they have built the trust as interlocutors, as being bridges within their own communities, talking to either side. If all of a sudden, in the context of a track one or from a peace process, they're all of a sudden put to one side, as if they're part of a sort of entity that is only one side of the conflict, they lose their integrity as independent, impartial, insider voices. So again, the independence factor becomes really important. And what all of this shows basically is that it's very idealistic in today's conflicts to think that that every war that we're dealing with only has two sides. There's a tendency to when we say we should have inclusive processes, there's a tendency from more old-fashioned diplomats to say, oh, that's very idealistic. It's very hard to do that. But I would challenge that and say the idealistic notion right now is to think that Yemen is two sides. No, they're different parties, they're different factions, they're different local actors, national actors, regional actors that are there. And so the process should be designed to reflect the problem. And the problem has actors that are spoilers, but actors that are also positive. And the process should also include that. And again, that's where the question of women peacebuilders comes in. And it's also about this idea that somehow the parties that come, the formal parties that come, are representative, legitimate voices of their societies. And again, this is another thing that I challenge in what I've seen in the work that we've done and in conversation and discussions with our colleagues. That is, if we're looking at Syria and we're saying that the government of Syria is representative and the opposition group is representative, but then you look at who and what they're each doing, and you realize that both sides are perpetrating violence of some sort on the communities within the Syrian context, we have to ask, are they credible representatives of their societies? Have they taken on the responsibility to protect their communities? If they haven't, if they've been violent towards their own people, then their legitimacy and their credibility on that score has to be questioned as well. And we need other voices to come in who've demonstrated that responsibility to protect. How do women become peace builders? In the paper, one of the things that I look at is the trajectory of what happens, and these are sort of some of the ideas that people have shared. One is that it's very unique personalities, characters who, when a problem arises, run to the problem to solve it, as opposed to running away from it. So this idea of, we see child soldiers, we need to go and bring them out. We see food being necessary, we need to do relief, going and solving it. My colleague Robina Rabumbe from Uganda, who's here, said, I went into exile and I didn't want anyone else to go into exile like I did. So this idea of kind of trying to avoid the pain that you've experienced, moving, being sort of transferred generation after generation. And that's the second point that I want to say, that we see so many peace builders coming from a place of personal loss. For a lot of people, they may come from a rights-based kind of, this is inherently the right thing, justice element to do, but so often peace builders emerge first from a place of personal loss and wanting to give meaning to that loss and wanting to make sure that others avoid that loss. So that emotional, psychological dimension is very important. A third element that we see across the board is this question of really genuinely wanting to represent and bring forth the voices of communities, building trust across the different lines, consulting with people and having a feedback loop of saying, if I go to the civil society peace room for the Syria process, I'm taking the voices of my community there, bringing their issues to the table, and then taking what is happening at the peace table back to the local level. So that feedback loop, but really feeling the burden of responsibility to say, I'm in a place where I can speak for people who don't have a voice, and bringing that forward. And then there's a element, again, that overlaps with human rights defenders, which is about, again, understanding that there is discrimination against us as women trying to be in these spaces. So there's gender discrimination, but there's also discrimination of attitudes around minorities and others. And so often the challenges comes when we're seeing local actors dealing with international actors. So we get international actors saying, oh, but it's your culture. The politicians or the parties to the conflict say, they won't talk to women. Taliban, for example. The other day, Wajma Frog, our colleague from Afghanistan, said the Taliban is quite happy to talk to all sorts of women in uncovered, without hijab, in miniskirts and whatever, foreign women, but the only women they're not talking to are Afghan women. So the idea that they don't talk to women is nonsense. They do talk to women. They just don't want us at the table. So asserting that kind of universality of human rights and the fact that the demand for justice, the demand for dignity and equality is something that cuts across the board. Now, this part of the paper was for me a lot of fun, because as an anthropologist, I really think it's important that instead of constantly being told that, okay, the only hook that we have is the law. We have a Security Council resolution, now we have to bring it down to the ground, and can we get a legal framework in our countries and so forth. That's important, and that's really, really useful. But we all know that the law is one aspect of how change happens in society. Your culture, the invisible kind of fibers and fabrics, the sort of threads that weave us together, that is culture and faith and tradition. These are the elements that women draw on. And if we and I say this very much, if we in Western academic research institutions, policy institutions, don't recognize how much power women can derive from those elements, we're really missing the point about how this works. And in the paper, I look at it from the standpoint of how women use kinship ties, their roles as mothers, their roles as sisters, their roles as wives, their roles as daughters, to navigate political spaces, whether it's in Somalia or Sri Lanka. Again, motherhood being a key element of this question of how much, so often it's like, oh, motherhood is essentialism and it's motherhood and apple pie. No, motherhood is power. And we've had from Israel all the way to Argentina over the last 20, 30 years and elsewhere, in Yemen, as I mentioned, the use of motherhood as a social status to demand and change militaristic ideals. So again, recognizing that. Tradition and superstition. In West Africa and elsewhere, we have stories and cases where women use tradition and superstition to shame armed actors. And that, again, is really important, because if we don't understand that in West Africa, when women come forward and, as they did in Sierra Leone, they lifted their skirts and bared themselves to men, and then that had a whole catalyzed the movement of supporters behind them, and it was also kind of a curse on the armed actors. If we don't understand the power of that, we're really, again, missing a huge resource around the question of peace. The next issue is around religion, and I have a number of examples from Nigeria, Pakistan, and elsewhere, where our partners are using faith to literally harnessing the power of faith, Christianity, Islam, etc., to articulate their work as for peace and their role as women in the space for peace. So instead of assuming that religion is a negative force, and sometimes it can be, we all know that, it's actually saying, well, what else is there in the text that talks about Islam? Says Islam is peace. So how do you use that to further your arguments against intolerance and violence and so forth? So again, women at the local level using these things. And then finally, another aspect of this is so often we're seeing that our partners on the ground are the leaders, and they're tapping into patriarchal norms, patriarchal leaders, but in the positive aspects of that. So patriarchy or manhood or masculinity has an element of being protective. Now, protective can be, they become warriors and it becomes all about shame and honor, or it can be positively protective. And so in Afghanistan, our colleague Hasina Niksad has been doing work over the last few years of literally talking to men, getting them to see their own humanity and their own experiences of violence, and then engaging them to be the voices of peace and the champions of equality in their own communities. So it's women leading men. It's like sort of leading and tapping into the good of the guys, as opposed to assuming that everything is toxic masculinity. So that holistic approach. I'm gonna stop there because I just want to sort of give that framing and then open it up to see for our conversation amongst ourselves around how much of this, what the examples are from elsewhere. And I'm sorry if I took a little bit longer than I should have done, Melinda. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Sanam, for laying out the findings of this paper and the collective work of the Women Peacebuilders of WASL and beyond. Yeah, just on the time check, we did start a little late due to technical difficulties. So we'll probably plan to go till about 10:15, about 15 minutes over, and we hope that you all can join us. I realized I forgot to introduce myself when I started. So I'm Melinda Holmes, as you can probably see on your screen. I'm the program director at ICAN for the Women's Alliance for Security Leadership. So with that, I wanted to turn back to this question of who are women peace builders really, and hear from some of those gathered here, including Rosa Emilia Salamanca, who's been looking at this question based on her experience in Colombia. So Rosa Emilia is a project advisor with CIASE in Colombia, which is a collective of women human rights defenders and women peace builders, and women who are both. And they have been, aside from contributing hugely to the peace process and working with victims and others to bring women and gender perspectives into the peace process in Colombia, they have been working on action research on this precise question of who are women peace builders, what do they do, and also issues around protection, which we'll revisit later, of women peace builders, which, as we know, is so critical in places like Colombia. And they've been working with women in communities and territories affected by the conflict. And so, Rosa, I would love to turn to you and ask you, how have you found that peace building is distinct from other types of work, and what is special about being a woman doing peace building work based on your experience and research?
Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Melinda. And thank you so much, Sanam, for doing all this framework work about women's peace builders. We think that it's quite important to be recognized, but it's not easy to be recognized. Going back to the questions you have done, how is peace building distinct from other types of work and having the opportunity? And what is the special about being a woman peace builder? Well, we don't have real complete answers because there are so many different ways of addressing these issues that has been quite difficult. We have been doing research that we are doing jointly with ICAN here in Colombia as a case of what a woman peace builder is here. And we find that a woman peace builder is someone that is incredibly active, but is also tenacious, tireless, passionate, optimistic, resistant, resilient, curious, reflective, diverse. And I want to say that because we are so diverse. There is not a way of being a woman peace builder. We also can see here that they are ex-combatants that are peace builders. They are teachers that are peace builders, nuns that are peace builders, indigenous that are peace builders, Black people that are peace builders, peasant, and even business women. So you cannot say there is only one kind. There are women that also are brave, committed, participatory, supportive, and dynamic. I think that all those words will show you that the women that are asking for peace, they come from very different contexts, they come from very different cultures, but they have in common what? They want for them and for their communities dignity, justice, access to a good life, and not to be, I don't know how to express this, because at the beginning in Colombia, we were saying, and not to be afraid all the time. But now we know that being afraid is something that is natural. But we don't want to be terrorized all the time. We don't want our communities to be terrorized all the time. So we have been learning that being a peace builder is also knowing how to manage emotions. That is very difficult in our countries, but that is so important. So I can say that for many people, women are peace builders because they sacrifice themselves for their communities. And we are trying to change that. We are saying women don't have to sacrifice. We don't have to continue saying that is the sacrifice and the victimization of women the ones that are really building peace. That is not fair. Is what I have just said, is the bravery, is the committed action, is the participatory action, is the tenacious way of behavior, the one that is really moving women's peace builders. They are usually, or all the women we interview inside the country and outside the country, we saw that they have a very complex agenda because they are not only talking about rights and all the things, but they are talking about building a kind of pact between societies. I mean, many places where societies are completely broken, Women's Peace Builder try to build some kind of agreements between society to make these women of societies alive again. So that is so important. So they create a lot of tools against war, but also other kind of solutions to bring as an say, basic education, infrastructure, health, human rights. So in many ways, building in turn a peaceful society is a lot of equality. But I want to also highlight that for Women's Peace Builder is not an easy task. I mean, all the time we are questioning ourselves what we are doing. So it's a huge transforming of ourselves also. We are all the time what we call here in our network, we are transforming ourselves to transform society. So this is not only a one-way conversation, it's a conversation that will change ours all the time.
Thank you so much, Rosa. And we really look forward to the results of your research and what Colombian women have really pioneered on this subject of being women peace builders, but also very active in all spaces of civil society. And so with that, I just wanted to go now to Jen Freeman, who's worked with you, Rosa, I know, extensively on this research and previously at the University of San Diego's Kroc Institute of Peace and Justice. Jen, you're now the CEO of Peace Geeks, but before this you led the Women Peacemakers program at Kroc IPJ and are doing your PhD on this topic at the University of San Diego. So I'd love to just hear a few minutes from you about what characteristics you found that women peace builders have in common and how they're distinguishable from the other women civil society actors, such as women human rights defenders and humanitarian actors, who are also doing such important work.
Thanks, Melinda. And I want to build on a lot of what Rosa Emilia has just said and Sanam prior to her. So I'll try and keep it succinct because they've already given a great foundation. But I think it's important to acknowledge too that these are approaches. Peace building is an approach, human rights is an approach, humanitarian engagement is an approach, and that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Some people on this call have already heard me talk about, in my work before documenting the work of women peace builders, researching the nature of threats that have targeted women peace builders and human rights defenders, that work has highlighted some similarities in goals from these many different identities, women who choose to engage in violent conflict, and also some really key differentiators, especially when you get to, as Sanam was saying, that really sensitive cross-community work. So while women and men can do peace building work and human rights work and be humanitarian actors, they're not rigid identities. They're also not synonymous identities. I'm so glad we're having this conversation to really tease out what is it about being a woman peace builder that's not just synonymous with those other terms. I really like what Rosa Emilia spoke to about the diversity of women peace builders, that it's not just a single profession. Again, it's that type of engagement. And what Sanam was saying about how it draws on a unique personality. The women, like so many of the women on the call, who when they see a problem, they're running towards it. So the women peace builders that I've worked with or studied seem to have been, exposed to injustice and took that approach, like Sanam was saying, to be engaged, that experiencing violence caused them to want to be involved in finding a solution to end it. And so while they may have started with, a really important, defending human rights, engaging in humanitarian provision, they may have had a role in providing care for their families or their communities at large. And then when violence broke out, they were thrust into providing that humanitarian care, not just for themselves, but also for others. And I think that's where you get to that trajectory that you were spoken about, and the kind of flexibility that Rosa Emilia was saying, that peace builders don't stop with just looking after themselves or their community. That the experience of the violence, what I see commonly is that it causes either a new or a deeper understanding that their experiences of violence and oppression are shared, as are the needs. We have so many examples, and I know there's so many rich examples from this virtual room. But there were women I was working with in Eastern Kivu who recognized that the closure of a road was preventing food and medicine from getting to both of their communities. Neither one of the groups were able to negotiate against the armed actor to stop the road closure. But when they joined forces saying, okay, it's in all of our best interests to get that road open, that opened the bridge and opened the space for a ceasefire, a negotiation with both sides that then got provisions to everybody. So that ability to think about what's going to be good for wider society. And it's empathy. And I think, Sanam mentioned that, but Rosa Emilia spoke to it, that leads to some very pragmatic approaches to find not just an immediate end to the violence, but a sustainable solution to the conflict that needs to be nonviolent. Peace builders often speak about not wanting anyone else to suffer as they've suffered, that's the motivation in driving them. That a sustainable solution to the conflict has to be mutually beneficial. Again, it can't be just political, it can't be punitive, otherwise the cycle of violence is going to resurge. The underlying causes of the conflict need to be addressed. And in order to do that, there also needs to be efforts towards restoration, reconciliation, and healing that needs to take place so that communities can create that shared peaceful future together. And as Sanam spoke to, that aspect of togetherness is perhaps one of the key commonalities with peace builders, is the ability to see the humanity in all of us. In order to successfully be able to find common ground and build a shared future where former perpetrators are going to be able to live alongside perhaps their victims, peace builders recognize the imperative for radical inclusion, not just inclusion of a few key groups, but radical inclusion. And being willing to speak to all sides and actors is so important. And I'll be really quick because Sanam opened with it too. But their ability to do that, drawing on so many identities. I mean, the Women, Peace and Security agenda is still so stuck on vulnerability and the need for empowerment. Women Peace Builders are just such a key example of a whole range of levers of power that women employ, especially the phenomenal folks that I know on this call, using their identities, the social cachet as mothers, as within religious context, within social context. All of those levers are a way to find connection with the people that they're seeking to engage with. And so they use all of that. And it's a bit of an enigma because I don't think in traditional professions, we like to have a specific skill set, a specific toolbox. And this ability to be a chameleon and access all these different sources is a little bit, hard for others to understand. Similarly, this cross-community work, I think, is, if it's not recognized as peace building, is often misrepresented. It's seen as duplicitous. Those who don't understand its underlying principles get accused of saying, well, whose side are you really on? And the answer, I'm on all of their sides, I'm on all of our sides. It's still not understood in our dominant white-black security paradigms. People doubt peace builders, their aims, and then they seek to undermine their credibility because they, oh, you can't possibly be on everyone's side. You got to have a vested interest here. And that itself is deeply gendered. Feminized characteristics of empathy and compassion being devalued in patriarchal spaces, including peace negotiations. So I can continue going on, but I think that
thank you so much, Jen. And as Sanam has alluded to before, this is really laying out this framework, and it's not the beginning of the conversation, but it's the beginning of a new phase in the conversation. There's so much more, obviously, that we have to talk about and deepen. You know, with those illustrations of what and who women peace builders are, which I think have really honed in on so many important aspects. I'd like to turn now to Marita Sorheim-Renvik, who is the Norwegian Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security. And Marita, you've been with us since the beginning of WASL and before. And you know, you are one of us, indeed. And I want to know, though, from your perspective working with governments, why does it matter that we recognize women peace builders? And you know, how does the recognition help make the case for their inclusion and representation in peace processes, such as Sanam was referring to at the beginning?
Well, thank you, Melinda. Thank you, Sanam, Jennifer, and Rosa, Amelia, and everyone. It's great to be with you. I have to say, it makes me so happy. So first of all, hello, big family. I believe I'm here today because I was uncommonly enthusiastic about the first draft I saw from Sanam and ICAN this summer of a paper discussing women peace builders and the importance of recognizing their work. Of course, women peace builders themselves, and you do that, speak to what it means to be recognized. And of course, you do deserve that recognition. And I consider it our responsibility, all of ours, to ensure that we don't only welcome women peace builders and the work, but also actively strive to remove barriers that hamper their effectiveness and jeopardize their security. And one such barrier might be the lack of understanding and formal recognition, in fact. And I regret having to admit this, but despite our policies and procedures and our fundamental commitment to supporting women peace builders and including them in our work, our Norwegian teams, as well as almost all other teams, I suspect, need a deeper understanding of whom we're dealing with when we talk about women peace builders. And so outlining the similarities and differences and the sometimes overlaps between women peace builders, human rights defenders, politicians, ex-combatants, and mediators, etc., is truly helpful because the competence and the experience of women peace builders become concrete, specific, tangible, and it's something that others can relate to. Through the stories of women peace builders, we realize that while pretty much every person hit by conflict starts off as a conflict and peace amateur, some local women and men soon become experts at the problems that they're facing and remarkably adept at dealing with the everyday implications of the crisis, finding solutions to big and small challenges and building trust and seeking reconciliation where fear and animosity divide communities. And this is an expertise we need in peace processes, and an expertise that we don't necessarily have access to through experienced international mediators or even the conflict parties' delegations that might be rooted in the conflict communities. And for this reason, I find this process that we're having now to be extremely important because it speaks directly to the very tough discussions about who the women are that need to be included in peace processes and why and when. And it becomes obvious that women peace builders who demand to be heard are doing us a favor. And the fact that women peace builders are a resource that remarkably also seems to be readily available everywhere where there is conflict is such an asset to our team that often struggle to find good entry points. So recognizing women peace builders and defining who they are is important because it might reveal these facts to more actors centrally placed in peace processes, making the how and the why of inclusion more intuitive. Less of a normative obligation and more of a deep felt urge to do things differently. Therefore, recognition of women peace builders could be helpful for us and others as we work to enhance women's participation in track 1 or even 2 and 3 in a relevant way that makes the most of women's peace builders' capacity and competence. That's it.
Thank you, Marita. So well put. So we wanted to kind of open the discussion to, you know, all of the amazing women peace builders who are here around the table to really dig in a little bit to this question of, you know, what does it mean to you to be a women peace builder, and what is the impact of this recognition? But given the time, I think what we'll do is we'll kind of combine the discussion towards the end, because I see also that folks are kind of gathering their thoughts. We have so much food for thought on the table from the intervention so far. So I would like to turn then back over to Sanam to kind of go through briefly the operational framework, and then we have a surprise and special guest in Senator Mubina Jaffer, who was a special envoy in many peace processes and is on ICAN's board and is here to also shed light on her experience of acting on inclusion and how to actually operationalize some of these points. Sanam, go ahead.
Thank you. So one of the things, so again, thank you very much for the discussions that we've had. One of the things that I wanted to, as we're looking at this, right, it's so often we're told, oh, women should come into the process at the end, or they should stay in track 3. But we know that track 1 is where big decisions are made. And as Marita said, the importance of having not only the ways to engage and sort of be present, but also have problem solvers at the table to help the outside forces. What we did was, instead of the big ticket items of saying, well, we need to change patriarchal systems. You know, I never know what, yes, we do need to change patriarchal systems, but how do you go about doing them, right? That's what do you do about changing literally 2,500 years of the way war and peace has been negotiated, which is the big guy sitting in a room and dealing with each other. It takes time. And so what we've done in this operational framework is I've taken kind of key steps that would guarantee and enable participation of women peace builders. And then instead of saying, oh, well, this is something that we should try, I've actually said, this is stuff that we've tried already. It's been done. It's been done by international actors around the world. And so really what we need to do from 2020 onwards, literally starting today, is to say, if it was done in Yemen in 2012, it should be done in Afghanistan in 2015. There is no reason why we shouldn't make the good practices and precedents or standard operating procedures. So the 10 points very quickly. The essence of what we're saying is that peace builders should have their own independent delegations in the nature of peace talks. This has happened before. It happened in 2000 with Somali, the 6th Clan. It happened in the National Dialogue in Yemen. It happened in Northern Ireland. It's happened elsewhere. So there's no reason why. It's about a design question when outside actors are involved in a process. It's related to the second point, that how do we make sure that happens? Well, it's if you start off by saying the UN is convening these talks and we say minimum 30% because the demand is coming from the ground, but it's also our own values. Trust me, it happens, right? It's nobody wants to be left out if the conditions are being set. So it's that to make that happen, you need coordination and agreement from the outside forces that are involved in the facilitation and the hosting and funding of mediation processes. Third thing, convening early and knowing who your actors are. And thanks to Marita, that Norway is doing this in the places where they're active. It's laying out before things get set and the agenda gets set about these are the issues and these are the actors, really figuring out who are the actors, who are the peace actors, what are the women saying, how are they connected and interconnected with each other, and bringing them into the spaces so that it's not, so that I say it's like you become part of the furniture. It's people people's fear of who are these women and what are they going to do and so forth actually subsides, because they realize that it's very practical voices coming and it's very authentic human voices. So that engagement from an early start and understanding. Fourth thing, we've had in the past women, humanity, people who've been doing humanitarian work or women peace buildings or organizations and others being invited to officially observe the formal peace talks. And this one goes back to 1999, where the process was happening, and then as it went on, Nelson Mandela was one of the envoys, and he convened the women, and the guys were there. There were 17 armed actors, but Mandela convened the women and said to them, okay, there's a negotiation around ceasefires and power sharing or whatever governance issues. What do you think? And the women came up with their solutions quicker than the men did, and it actually challenged the men to take up some of those issues. But that idea of a significant figure taking on the role of saying, yes, I'm going to listen to what they're saying, and their voices matter, and giving that kind of access and enabling and elevating the legitimacy. Another thing, inviting women peace builders to regularly speak to delegations about what's on the negotiations agenda. So again, Doha talks are going on, Libya talks are going to be going on. Bring the women to talk to the men, right? Get them to be there at the beginning, in the middle, at the end. What are you doing? This is what we expect. This is what's happening. These are the issues that are on the table. So often the delegates that are in the meeting rooms aren't living on the ground in the middle of the war, in the middle of where this stuff is happening. They actually don't know what's going on the ground. So bringing that human voice brings an urgency, but it also brings very practical and pragmatic issues to the table. Gendered briefing papers. This is a very simple thing that you can do. That how do we know that in Colombia, when you're negotiating land, what the gender dimensions are? It's as part of the UN standby team, we were producing these things for the UN and the Norwegian envoy that was convening the Colombian peace process. But it was bringing in the ideas in a very practical way and saying, this is what's happening to people. So that it wasn't one side or the other. It was very much like, whether you're the FARC or whether you're the government, there are issues there that need to be addressed from the standpoint of the different needs of men and women, whether it's land, whether it's disarmament issues and so on. Funding early work. This is important. We've started doing that. We have some examples of early enablement of women getting together, but it's one of the biggest challenges that women are saying, Afghan women are saying we want to be there, but they need resources to be able to convene and do their own consultation. There are so many resources that are given to armed actors and to the conflict parties, but when it comes to the peace actors, they're not given the same sort of assistance. At ICAN, the number 8, we've started doing this where we're saying, you know what, if people need to travel and get themselves moving to places, we're going to give them rapid response grants. And starting this year, the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund that the UN runs is also going to be taking on this model. And it's such an important thing of saying, the talks are happening in 3 days' time. We need resources to get people traveling. Because again, the armed actors get that assistance. And this is the problem. If you're violent, somebody will take you and somebody will give you per diems. If you're peaceful, they don't. So we need to reframe that balance. Issues with visas and travel, Mobina can talk to this, but this idea that we're sending planes to pick up the armed actors, well, why not also send in the planes to pick up the women? The EU a couple of years ago used their diplomatic visas to bring Yemeni and Syrian women to the UN in New York, because to circumvent the Muslim ban that the US administration has put forward, right? So that idea that they can be part of your delegations. If we're not going to have them as separate, why not have Afghan women as part of somebody else's delegations? This kind of creativity, if we're genuinely serious about this. And then finally, this is something, again, in the post-COVID world, this is going to be very important. When we're looking at a shrinkage of resources for development and foreign aid, why on earth would we put if you're living in America or Europe or wherever, people are going to be questioning, why are we putting money into these places? Isn't it just a drain? So the EU, the European Council, has issued a statement saying that before they commit funding or political support for the Afghan peace process, they're going to make sure that the agreements that are coming are really upholding the rights of women and marginalized communities. So looking at it and sort of putting some conditionality there. And again, what's important, how this will be really effective, is if all of the international actors engaged in any conflict context have a coordinated approach in terms of what the core goals are and so forth, so that you're not competing with each other. One of the problems right now is that the outside forces are competing, and that creates a lot of challenges. But if we kind of move in very clear ways, we can shift the approach. And by doing this, sometimes you need the design to get the inclusion, but sometimes you just need to get them there, and then that changes the nature of the design and the discussions that are happening as well. So we don't have to wait for one and the other. It's just taking the opportunity, finding the entry points, and going forward with it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sanam. And now I want to go to Senator Jaffer. Senator Jaffer, you have been an envoy, and what methods have you used to ensure Women Peacebuilders participation? Have you used some of the examples that Sanam has shared? And how do you think we can systematize these kinds of good practices?
Well, every peace process is different. And I was involved in the South-North peace process. And when I was involved in the South and North peace process, I failed miserably because I was involved at the end. And when I kept saying, where are the women? Why are the women not sitting at the table? They kept saying to me, you can't say that because you will tilt the balance. The peace process won't go through. We cannot have women. We won't arrive at a peace process. And I just didn't succeed in getting women at the peace table. But then when the Darfur peace process happened, Canada had a bigger role to play, and I was there from the right at the beginning. And as the men were being selected from the different groups, from the different rebel groups, and they were being selected from Europe. The men were coming from all over Europe. And I said to the UN, you're sending planes to Europe to pick the men up. Why can't you send planes to the refugee camps to pick up the women? Why can't you have the same treatment? And of course, no. And then I kept saying, but you have a resolution. There's a unanimous resolution. I wasn't successful until the mediator, Salim and President Obasanjo agreed with me. And so as the planes were going to Europe to pick the men up, the planes also, UN planes, went to the refugee camps and brought the women. And what that did is completely change the process, because the men had not lived in Darfur for a long time. The women were still living there. So when they would argue, for example, about a river, the women would say, what are you talking about? That river dried many years ago. I used to go get water from them. I know the area. And so women bring a very different perspective. If we're going to have sustainable peace, we have to have women at the table. But I want to say that, as Jan said so articulately, that women peace builders come in different forms. That was a long time ago when I was involved in the process. But it's an ongoing process. And as a parliamentarian, I'm always saying to our foreign ministers and our international, where are the women? Where are the women? And continuously sending materials, continuously raising awareness, having inquiries, having reports on where are the women. You can never talk more about it. I don't want to put a damper, but I am very concerned that the resolution 1325 has been diluted. And we as peacekeepers now, I want to say to, Sanam was involved in for 1325, really fought. And if we really fought to get the resolution 1325 in place. And the same way, we are going to now have to fight to make, fight is a bad word when we're talking about peacekeeping, but what I mean is that we have to now make sure that our rights are not diluted by bringing other issues. And if you see all the other resolutions that have come in place after resolution 1325 as part of resolution 35, it's an ongoing process. I feel it dilutes women's rights. And to bring sexual assault within resolution 1325 and after is diluting what we're talking about. Nothing absolutely important to talk about that, but it's not part of 1325. It's to have women as equal partners. So we have to be ever vigilant. And I want to say to people that, Women Peacebuilders are of many, they have many tasks, and a lot of peacekeeper builders on this call today. You know, when the pandemic came, they still didn't leave their communities and changed their roles to support their communities. And they literally sewed the communities together when there was nobody else, there was a void. And that's what Women Peacebuilders do. They look at what is happening in the community. They see what needs to be done right now. They don't label themselves as peace builders. They label themselves as women that are going to bring harmony in the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mubina. This is resonating with folks who are watching live on Facebook. We've received quite a few comments, seconding and thirding the findings and the topics of discussion, and particularly this point about the politicization of the issues and the fact that what's needed is this fundamental shift that we've talked about from looking at the issue around as power sharing, as control, and to really focusing on the well-being of populations, which is very much what Women Peacebuilders bring to the table. I want to go back to Rosa Amelia, who has additional comments, and then we have about just a few minutes left, and I certainly wanted to open the floor to the WASL members who are, as you can see around the table. We've been talking about these issues for months and years, in fact, together. So everything that we've shared very much is distilled from those conversations. But I also want to give you all, the chance to hear directly from them, and we look forward to as well future chances. So as we wait for folks to chime in, Rosa, please go ahead and give us some additional insights that you would.
Yeah, very, very short, because I want other people to
خلاص
participate.
ما
I
عندي
want to say
كان موضوعي عن
Go ahead.
just to say, one is very different for a peace builder to be in different moments of a peace process. I think that is very important to understand that we have to be very creative and try to find many ways, because there are different moments, in the moments of negotiation, of peace negotiations, or in the moments of transformation. And what I mean by transformation is coming out of this peace formal processes to real society and what it means to change, and the echoes, what we call the echoes of a peace process. And it's very difficult and very different for consolidation of what it comes out of a peace process. So especially for societies like ours that have deep, these are very confrontative societies. So there is a lot of work that we have to do, a lot of dialogues, a lot of consultations. So there must be a lot of ideas that when you have a negotiation of a peace process, that doesn't mean that the society have negotiate as a whole, and that you need many other processes. And that's why women peace builders are so important, because they are, or we are doing processes and dialogues all over the society. And finally, I want to say that for Latin America, we as women peace builders, furthermore than the Colombians, Mexicans and others, are trying to bring on board another idea of what peace means for our continent. And that is so important. And I want to say it here in the 1325 moment also, because we have to make more wider what we think that is conflict and what is peace. So we are challenging ourselves in Latin America to really address new ways of the women's peace and gender agenda to address what peace is for us now in Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosa, for those comments. Esther just shared from Cameroon some comments in the chat. Esther, I'd love for you to just add those to the conversation so everyone watching can hear your perspective from Cameroon, the other side of the ocean.
Thank you very much, Melinda, we have very rich conversations today around the table, and this is going to make a great U-turn in the work of women peace builders around the world. Now, they always ask the question as to where are they in our communities. I always hear people in my country, I hear people saying that, asking the questions as, where are they? Where are those women peace builders who make noise every day? Where are they? And I keep saying that we are here. We've always been here. We've always been working from our homes, our neighborhoods, our communities, our regions, and our country and beyond. We've always been there. We are those women who have been changing the narratives and ensuring that policies are influenced for a better tomorrow for our communities, for our women, for our children. We are the bridges who have stood the test of time, making sure that things happen at grassroots before going global, trying to serve as linkages between the grassroots to global level. But yet, and still, we are not recognized. People still doubt us because they think that or believe that it is about power tussle. We are saying here today that it's not about power tussle. It is about bringing together on an equal platform what we all have for the better of our communities. Thank you, Melinda.
Thank you so much, Esther. With that powerful conclusion, I'm going to wrap up for today. We had some questions, that we didn't get to take up, and we look forward to ongoing dialogue on these. I want to thank everyone for being here with us. I want to thank the members of WASL who are always so willing to share with each other and with us. I see you, Clotilda, and I want to say hi. Everyone can say hi before we conclude. We have it on gallery view, so everyone watching can be in the space with us. I encourage you to see the paper that's been just published at our website, icanpeacework.org. This is part of our ongoing She Builds Peace campaign. It informs it, it provides a knowledge base for that initiative to stand with women peace builders. And we will have papers and frameworks coming out on protection as well as funding, both of which have come up here as key aspects of the work of Women Peace Builders. So those are forthcoming before the end of this month, and so stay tuned for the specific details, and we look forward to welcoming you to another call. I'll open the floor, the mics, feel free to unmute yourself and say what you will, and then we'll close the call.
Hi from Morocco.
I want to say, I think we're going to be translating the paper as well, probably into Arabic and Spanish
Arabic
or whatever
first,
language.
and then French and Spanish, and hopefully Farsi as well as soon as possible.
Thank you, gracias.
Gracias.
Thank you so much, Rosa. Thank you, Maria.
Well, for now.
Gracias a todas.
Everyone.
Thank you, all of you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good work.
Nice seeing everybody.
Thank you. We'll share the recording.
Goodbye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.
Bye.